recording now.
Okay.
Hi, welcome everyone. Session 3 on cyber defense. I'm going to hand it over to Jared and Alexi.
Okay, hello everybody, and I'll be doing the first half of a presentation, and then Jared will take over on Wireshark. So without further ado, I think we'll skip a presentation of ourselves because it's already obvious. It's Alexi and Jared, and we're here for you to pretty much guide you through another interesting session, which will cover NetCat, and that was quite an interesting clue last year. Whomever attended our CCDC challenge, and nobody guessed what is MAU and what is CAT, and so right now we'll talk about it a little bit more, and then we'll jump into intro to packet capture and analysis, and of course our main tool will be Wireshark, and there will be a lot of Wireshark hands-on that Jared will provide. So without further ado, let's jump into the NetCat, and that's also known as NC. And basically what it is, it's a TCP/IP Swiss Army knife. One can say what the hell it means. Basically, this utility can create, so it can initiate or listen to connection for TCP and UDP. It has some abilities to manipulate raw socket, but we won't concentrate on that. So what would be the common NetCat uses? And one of the common new uses would be network daemon testing. Basically, maybe some of you have an experience with pinging stuff in order to test connectivity. Basically, by ping, you will just understand if the device up or down, or actually if it's blocked your ping. But what if we want to dig a little bit farther and have an opportunity to talk to the remote daemon? So what we will do, we actually will initiate NetCat, and on the next slide we'll have a couple of samples that you can try your hands on and see how it works. So another use is simple TCP proxies, and actually maybe the most the easiest way of using NetCat and most entertaining for high school students, I guess. You can actually organize some kind of a chat through the NetCat, which is somewhat interesting. So also for day-to-day work at in the production, shell script based HTTP client and server can be created. So for example, I need to request some information from Google, or let's just put it simple, some weather information, and I need to present it via my script or publish it to a different format, so it can be easily accomplished via NetCat. And there is much more uses, and we'll talk about it a bit. So NetCat example. So as I was saying, we can pretty much talk to a lot of things. But last session we were talking about Nmap, and Nmap is a very powerful tool in order to find out what is available on the network, finding all ports and services associated with the ports, and it even helped us to determine what operating system it is running. But basically right now we are using, we might not have Nmap installed, and let's be honest, it's not a part of standard Unix or Linux deployment. NetCat, on the other hand, sometimes is. So let's just see and try NetCat in terms of port scanning. So in my example, we will do it to Google, and Google won't be upset because you will just send a standard request, TCP request or connection to port 80. So feel free to go ahead and do that, and I'll just switch to another application to share. So just bear with me for a second. So Greg, I think I've revoked my own presenters, right? Could you please re-enable them?
You're still presenter.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, but I cannot. All my options for presenting programs in desktop disappeared.
Okay.
So let me just give you.
Your presentation is now grayed out.
Okay, so it was a problem with my connectivity. Now it's restored, so I can continue with my example. And so, do you see the screen with some text on it?
Yeah.
So, as you remember, in order to use NetCat with pretty much scanning capabilities, let's do that. I don't have access to this terminal to external world, so I'll just set up my own local host. And but
Sorry
instead
to
of
interrupt you, Alexi. Could you just speak up a little bit, please?
recap. Okay, so basically what I've done right now, it is scanned my own local host for port 80, and of course I'm not running any HTTP services, so one can see that connection was failed or refused. Let's just switch between the presentation, and that will be able to differentiate between two and follow the presentation step. So, okay, so right now, hopefully you would be able to see a PDF that talks about NetCat. So let's do talk to things. So let's just initiate connection to Google. I don't have, again, access to Google, but what I'll do, I'll set up a NetCat listener on my local host. And I don't want to use port 80 because it's a privileged port, so I need some kind of root privileges, and I don't want to do that. So let's try to talk to myself. The port was specified as 124. As you can see, screen is split. So at the top of the screen, I'm listening. At the bottom of the screen, I'm sending something. I'm just sending listing or directory access for list of files within the directory. Of course, I'm not executing anything with NetCat, so right now it works as a simple chat. Just say hello, whatever we want, and that's how it works. So let's go back to slides. That was one of the examples. And okay, sorry, too far. So we went through these two examples. Whomever doing it in the school, could you just go to the Google and actually, when the first line return, if you type at space / space HTTP / 1.1, actually you would be able to capture something from Google. You will be able to see a HTTP header response from the Google services. Okay, you can play with it while you are doing it on your own time. So I'll skip and say what or how else NetCat can be used. And as you were able to see on the different screen, I was issuing a NetCat minus VL and V. Actually, it just stands for verbose. So if something goes wrong, NetCat will tell you. It's great for troubleshooting. So 127.0.0.1 can be interchangeably used with a localhost, and basically a localhost resolves to 127.0.0.1. And 1234 is just a port, easy to type. And when I was saying that I want to invoke this communication on port 80, basically ports, if you remember, from 0 to 1024 are all privileged, and in order to initiate communication on this port, you need a super user, administrator, or root privileges. And this one is quite interesting. So some NetCat versions can execute remote shell. And from our perspective as a security professionals, I mean, you don't want to expose your shell, administrator shell, or just a regular user shell to outside world, as it might be quite a security vulnerability. However, the NetCat allows it to do that. As you can see that some NetCat utilities are not compiled with an EU option, so you want get shell. So let's just try it out again on. So as you can see, let's interrupt the connection. Interrupt the connection, just hold Control and press C, and it would be standard interrupt number 2, which actually stopped the process from executing. And let's try our So it didn't complain, but let's see if it worked. In fact, I know that it won't, but just to prove the idea that localhost theoretically right now can using listing command, and if the shell was running on the listener, we would be able to see the directory structure behind. However, this option is not available, so that's why it does not work. But as you might notice, it's pretty cool. So basically, without further ado, I give controls over to Jared, and you can take from there.
Sounds good. Thanks, Alexi. Let me just get the slides up here. Okay, Greg, can you see my slideshow here?
I can see packet capture and analysis screen.
All right, good. Okay. So I'm going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is packet capture and analysis. So what is it? Well, packet capture means essentially that you're grabbing packets, like live network traffic, as it goes by on the wire, like on the copper, on the fiber optics, through the air, or whatever. And so we can grab copies of live traffic and then save it for later analysis. There are lots of analysis tools out there. One of the most popular Swiss Army knives of tools is called Wireshark, and it's free, which is pretty awesome, and it's extremely full-featured. So why would you want to capture packets? Well, I'm mostly a network nerd. I do some security stuff, but a lot of what I do is diagnosing problems on the network using tools such as Wireshark. But from a security analyst perspective, it's hugely valuable to be able to replay network traffic. You can watch for security events like infections that go by. Sometimes we're having to investigate what users are doing. You know, if it's like unlawful, for example, or against company policy. We can capture viruses and Trojans and spam as it goes over the wire. And we can also look and see if people are exfiltrating data. Or so, for example, if you know, a bank teller is skimming credit cards or something and then sending them off the network, that kind of thing is data exfiltration. So private data leaving the company. So how do you go about getting network traffic? Well, essentially, you need to generally need to passively observe it. So the picture here is a device called a tap. Well, specifically, this one's an aggregator, but essentially the two leftmost cables are, you know, if that was plugged into a server, you would essentially divert the traffic through this tap, and then the red cable then sends a copy of every packet that goes through it. Now this box, you can't ping it, like you can't actually see that it's on the network. It's from the network's perspective, it's passive. So that's why we say it looks like a bump in the wire, because you really can't see it from the network perspective. And similarly, I don't have a picture of one, but similarly, there are fiber optic taps. Those work a little bit differently. They usually will slice off, like 30% of the light that's going across, and will mirror that to your collection point. Another really popular way to do it is I think used to be called in the Cisco world a span port, but it's just essentially it's a mirror port. So the idea here is that, let's say you have a user connected to port, well, in this example, 4/1, and you wanted to mirror all the traffic over to port 4/8. Well, in the Cisco Catalyst world, you just throw in these two commands, and your span port is set up. That's as easy peasy. So in the first line, it says monitor session 1 source interface, which is fairly obvious, and then it says both, because you have to keep in mind that Ethernet is a bidirectional protocol, so you can capture send, receive, or both. And then the switch will dutifully mirror it out to, in this case, port 10 gig 4/8. At which point you hook up your capture device to 4/8, and you get all the packets. Wireless is a little bit different. It's kind of an interesting thing. If you simply use Wireshark on your laptop, most hardware that you'll get in your laptop, and especially if you're running Windows, it can be a pain, because Windows won't show you everything. Generally, when you want to capture wireless sessions, you want to see all of the stuff in the air. So that's all the control protocol stuff. That's even networks that you're not directly connected to, so different SSIDs. So generally, when we're doing serious packet capture on 802.11 Wi-Fi networks, we use a specific piece of hardware. In this case, this is Riverbed's Air PCAP, which is not very expensive, but it's a dedicated piece of hardware that will then capture all of the frames on the air and spew it into your laptop or whatever your capture device is. There are also some really cool advances in software-defined radios now that are allowing more flexible capture. But anyway, just know that wireless can be a bit different of an animal. And the last case is somebody just hands you what we call a PCAP, or a packet capture. I get this a lot. Somebody will say, "Hey, there's a problem on my network, Jared. I'm able to observe it, and here's a capture file." So it's just they'll give it to me on a thumb drive or whatever. So this is very frequent too, that someone will just hand you a file and say, can you analyze this for me? Okay, Wireshark is again a Swiss Army knife of packet and traffic analysis. I'll have to caution you that it's not always the right tool for the job, just because it is such a feature-rich program, and it can be kind of intimidating at first. But that's why I just want to walk you through some really sort of basic things about how you might start analyzing a packet capture, and just some of the initial steps that you do, because it's not necessarily obvious where to start. Wireshark, just as an aside, Wireshark is great for showing you big picture and details and stuff, but if you want to do stuff like, I don't know, so you have a packet stream that, for example, has images over HTTP. If you need to bulk extract images or whatever content type, Wireshark's probably not the tool for you. You want to probably look at something like Network Miner. That's MINER, as in mining network traffic. That's a really cool tool if you need to do object extraction. And again, it's free. It's for Windows. It's pretty handy. So this is the Wireshark user interface. This just what comes up by default. The only reason I'm showing the sort of front interface is that if you're curious to see if you're going to do some capturing on your laptop and you don't know which device to capture from, where I have the mouse pointer here is that's actually a little graph of the traffic that Wireshark is currently seeing on your interface. So I have a WLO1, which is my wireless interface, and the other one is the ENP0S25 is my wired interface. So that's just a handy thing if you're not sure which interface to capture from. Okay, so here I've loaded up a packet capture within the main Wireshark user interface. The section, so there's essentially three main panels or panes, and you can organize these however you wish, but this is my general setup. The topmost pane is the packet list. So this is a line by line list of the packets that have been captured. Wireshark by default has some coloring filters, so we have some blue traffic and we have some green traffic. That's all. You can change all that, but sometimes those coloring rules can be handy. So we say DNS is in blue, and we have an HTTP TCP stream in green. The next panel down is the actual details of the packet itself. So you'll see it's actually sort of in a nested from bottom up. You have DNS, which rides inside of UDP, which rides on top of IP, and it's within an Ethernet frame in this case. So that just shows you the various encapsulations of what Wireshark thinks is in the packet. You'll also notice that Wireshark thinks this is DNS. In this case, it's right about it being DNS. Wireshark doesn't always get it right, especially if it's on non-standard ports, but more often than not, it will decode things correctly. And the last one here is called the packet bytes. You have hexadecimal on the left and ASCII on the right. Sometimes, if you're looking at an encrypted protocol, this is completely useless because it's just gibberish. Other times it can be useful. Again, it depends what you're trying to accomplish. But sometimes, if you don't want to see any of these panes, you can just go into the View menu and you can turn on or off any three of these panes. Display filters. You'll notice in red here, there's a little section where you can type in a display filter. Oftentimes, if you just start a packet capture on a busy network, you'll get so many packets that it's kind of like driving down the highway with your head stuck out of the window, right? It's just like it's too much. So generally, we look around a packet capture just using some basic display filters. So there's some examples here. If we just want to see DNS, we type in DNS, or HTTP. Similarly, there's for many protocols. You can also look at specific IP addresses, and the list of display filters is pretty crazy. I actually know what I'll point out that a guy named Jeremy Stretch did a whole bunch of really awesome cheat sheets, including Wireshark. He's at packetlife.net. So he's got some great cheat sheets. So especially for the network nerds here, I would encourage you to check out his work. Okay, so let's look at a specific example of what we might want to do. So we have this capture loaded, and I want to know how many conversations are in it. Super easy. Go to the statistics menu, conversations, and then TCP. In this case, we see that there's a single TCP conversation within this flow, or within this capture. And again, depending on the size of your capture, there could be one, there could be 4,000, there could be millions. But so for now, we have one. And it shows us what the addresses and ports of the two endpoints were, and it'll show you also how many packets and how many bytes were in the conversation. So that's a good tool to know, just kind of what am I looking at? How many people are talking here? This is one of my very favorite features of Wireshark. Very often in Wireshark, you're looking at individual packets, and sometimes they're not interesting on their own. One thing you can do is if you have a packet that you're interested in and you want to know what else is part of that conversation, what you can do is you can right-click on that packet, click on Follow, and then TCP. Now, what Wireshark will do, it'll do two things. First of all, it'll automatically make a display filter for you. In this case, it says TCP.streamEQ0. So it's doing a display filter on just that TCP stream. But it's also popped up a new window for us here that is an ASCII decode of the conversation. So it's collected all the packets, it's taken the payloads out of all those packets, and it's showing us, just because it happens to be plain text, it's showing us what was in that conversation from start to finish. So in red, we see what the client was asking of the server, and in blue, it's what the server has sent back to the client. So this is very handy. So oftentimes protocols will have lots of back and forth, so you'll be able to see in which direction the traffic is going simply based on the coloring rule. So this is a really basic example. I went to ipquail.com to find my IP address, and ipquail was nice enough to spit it back for me. It's just a what is my IP kind of service. But that's a simple example of an extremely powerful feature. So again, follow TCP stream. There's also, if you're looking at doing some analysis of back and forth, there's also a flow graph, so you can see not necessarily the contents of the conversation, but you can show who is talking to whom on which ports and when. It's super useful if you're doing analysis of trying to make sure that TCP is alive or not. And it's also very handy to see if there's firewalls in the way, for example. If you have a SYN go out and no SYN-ACK come back, you know something's blocking it, or that the endpoint just doesn't want to talk to you. Okay, so I have an exercise for you. At this URL, I've actually crafted a packet capture, and I would like you to open it up. I'm assuming that everyone has Wireshark. So I'm just going to ask a few questions. So we've talked about how do you determine how many conversations there are. We've talked about some coloring rules, like we know that DNS will by default show up as blue. And I have sort of a nebulous question of who is behaving badly. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll open up Wireshark here and I'll sort of walk through how we would do this. Okay. Greg, I assume you can still see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Super. So here we go. This is Wireshark. Here's the capture I've supplied for you. We can see that there's a whole lot more in here than there was in my trivial example in the presentation. But let's just look and see what we have. The statistics menu is very often where you're going to go look for stuff. One of the really handy things is just capture file properties. So I just want to know, like, sorry, the type is really small on this, sorry. Essentially, we have, let's look down here, I have 100 packets captured. I thought it was a nice round number. And it was a 60-second capture. So let's go try and answer some of those questions. So recall question number 1. We want to know, was it DNS? How many TCP conversations are there? Well, if you remember correctly, all we need to do is go into statistics and conversations. And Wireshark will attempt to tell us how many conversations. And we're specifically interested in TCP. So in this case, we see there's 2 conversations. There's one on port 25, and that might be interesting. Okay. So next we want to know how many DNS lookups were in here. Well, we could just pick through and go packet by packet and say, well, what was DNS? But recall our display filter. You just pop in DNS. And here we go. We have 4 DNS packets. So let's look at one of those. The first DNS packet is a lookup for a mail server. And then we can see right in here, it says that response to this question is in packet 13. So here's packet 13. And you know what? I'm going to go turn off the packet bytes. There we go. So the DNS answer in packet 13 has a whole bunch of answers in it, which is great. Okay. So that second question, how many DNS queries? There are 2 queries and there are 2 answers. And last but not least, who's behaving badly? sort of nebulous, but let's go back to, I'm going to turn off this display filter. Let's go back to those two conversations. Statistics, conversations, TCP. Okay, we can look at the bytes column, and one of them is small, one of them is bigger. So why don't we see what this is all about? On the bottom right, you'll have that same follow stream, which is the same as right-clicking and hitting follow TCP. We're going to hit follow stream, and we're going to see what happens. Oh, look, it's plain text. That's handy. So this looks like SMTP, which is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. Let's just close that window. There we go. It's SMTP, and this is pretty easy to read. It's mail from Frank, and it's to me. That wasn't supposed to be to me. But anyway, so here is the contents of an email. Hi, Serge. Here's the latest batch of credit card numbers I could skim without anyone noticing. Looking forward to my portion of the proceeds. So it looks like Frank is behaving badly here because he's sending credit cards, stolen credit card numbers off the network in email, which is bad form. So anyway, Frank's behaving badly. But again, this just shows you how powerful that conversation reassembly function is. And you can literally go from conversation to conversation and pick through a packet capture and go through really quickly, having Wireshark do all the reassembly for you. Okay, so those are all of the things that I wanted to talk to you about Wireshark. That is just barely skimming the surface of that tool, but again, it can be excruciatingly handy. So, on that note, I think we're almost out of time. So, I'll just ask if there's any questions.
Jared, I don't think there's any questions at this time.
Perfect. Then either it was really boring or I've done a great job. So, okay. Well, thanks everyone for attending. If there's anybody who's watching this recording who has further questions, actually just I think slide 1 or 2 has my contact information. Absolutely feel free to hit me up. I guess that's it for me. Back to you, Greg.
Thanks, Jared. Were the slides available online?
Yes, they are. That was on the very first slide.
Awesome.
Let me, is a shortened URL on the bottom right there.
Perfect.
So I'll just leave that up for a minute. And I will leave that the link to that packet capture up for a few weeks. Well, until after the CDC event, so I'll just leave it there.
Awesome. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.